we're going to go through a few things this afternoon. Firstly, we'll look at the learning outcomes for the management accounting techniques syllabus. We'll then have a look at the exam itself, what it's all about, and the kind of breakdown of the marks and stuff. We'll then look at the examiner report. I don't know if you look at this when you do your studies, but the examiner report, which is available on the AAT's learning portal, is quite a good insight into exactly what are the common pitfalls or the strengths that students tend to display during the exams. Of course, we're going to then look at some common pitfalls most students fall into and some top tips and resources to improve your performance. We'll have questions throughout, no doubt, but please feel free, as Jaden said, to ask any questions that you might have. So firstly, the learning outcomes for this particular unit. It's important that we learn what we should be in order to pass the exam. And it's not just about passing exams. Some of you really need this for your workplace as well. So it's important that we understand what this syllabus is about. So first of all, it's about understanding the purpose, and the uses of management accounting within organizations. So the why and how do we use management accounting effectively? Then we're going to look at, we need to look at techniques required for dealing with costs. So what are those different techniques? Yeah. Then, of course, being able to attribute costs to organizational requirements. So applying the knowledge to different organizational settings. Investigating deviations from budgets. Of course, we are all familiar with budgets. A budget, we know, is a financial plan. But as part of this syllabus, it's not just about putting a budget together. It's also understanding why the actual costs or revenues are not in line with what the budget suggests. Then, of course, an important part of the syllabus is using spreadsheets, using Excel to provide management accounting information. Now, as accountants, our main purpose is to provide information. That is our main purpose. But using spreadsheets, using Excel to provide that information provides useful insights and helps influence stakeholders. So it's about using those spreadsheet techniques. Then it's about understanding how to use management accounting techniques to support short-term decision making. This is all about your break-even analysis or things like inventory control, those short-term decisions. What techniques could we use to support them? And finally, understanding the principles of cash or liquidity management. So until you've delved into the syllabus, you won't understand this in as much detail, but that's what you're looking to achieve ultimately from studying this module. Now, to talk about the exam itself, the exam seems pretty short. It's only got 6 tasks in it, and it's not made up of 100 marks, but 120 marks. So the first thing that stands out there is that if it's out of 120, you need to get at least 84 marks to pass the exam. 84 marks is 70% to pass this exam. Now, that said, because there's more marks available, for each correct thing that you pick up, there might be more, for each, correct answer that you give, you might pick up a lot more marks, but you've got to be careful that whatever marks you get contributes towards passing and not really passing. I would encourage you to work towards a distinction grade. I always say to my students, aim for the stars, you land on the roof. If you just aim for the roof, you land in the mud. So we always aim for a distinction or a merit grade. So if you want a distinction grade, then clearly you have to pick up the pace. 90% of 120 is 108 marks to get a distinction grade. It's very doable as long as you put in the effort and get the the marks on offer while you do your exam. Of course, in your exam, the first task is on costing techniques. This covers topics such as absorption costing, marginal costing, inventory control methods. Of course, you need to be familiar with prior knowledge of what is a prime cost, what is the high-low method. This is the method used to split costs into fixed and variable elements. Of course, that's task 1, worth a lot of marks. So 24 marks out of 120 is about 20% of the marks available for that first task. Then the second task is on attributing overhead costs to organizational requirements. So this could be anywhere from absorption costing or activity-based costing questions tested. So that's again worth a lot of marks, 20%. Task 3 is on management accounting techniques to support decision making. So here we've got that cost, volume, profit analysis that you must be familiar with. Limiting factor analysis questions could be asked as well. And that again is a lot of marks. So if you add those 3 up, yeah, we've got about 60% marks if we've done the first 3 tasks really well. Now, the remaining tasks are, if you look at those task 4, task 5, and task 6, they're all to do with kind of budgeting and cash management. Okay, so you must be thorough in those 3 areas or 2 areas as well as spreadsheets in order to ensure that you pick up the remaining 70% of the marks on offer. Now, the remaining 30% of the mark, 40% of the marks on offer. Clearly can't think at this point in the afternoon. Should have had my lunch before starting. Anyway, so that will give you 100%. So clearly every part of the syllabus is important. You must be familiar, and not just familiar, but you must have done a lot of question practice in order to get those marks on offer. The exam is the longest exam at level 2, 2.5 hours, and it's partially computer, partially human marked. What does that mean? Well, there will be questions like you're used to, objective type, pick from a pick list, you pick an option, you put numbers in boxes and pick up marks there. So that can be easily marked by a computer. But then the spreadsheet tasks are marked by markers at the AAT. So what you've got to do is ensure that you give them what they're looking for. Remember, a computer is very logical in the way that it marks. Tutor a marker will give you the marks based on what you've done and whether you've done it right. Because Excel has so many different ways to do things, of course, you've got to be careful not to overdo it. And we'll talk about that, no doubt, as we go through. So first of all, when we've looked at the exam, we've got to think, well, where are the areas that students do well and do badly? The examiner report suggests that tasks 2, 3, and 4, going back there, those 3 tasks, are really well answered. Students take their time, they know how to work through them. Now, obviously they've been putting in the time and the effort to get those tasks spot on. Now, the poor performing tasks are task 1, task 5, and task 6. Now, what are those task 1, task 5, and task 6 tasks? Well, in terms of task 1, the examiner says that the notional time allowed, because you've got 2.5 hours, the time allowed for this task, which has 24 marks, is about 30 minutes. On average, students complete this task within 24 minutes. Students take about 24 minutes to complete this task. So less time than has been allowed. 57% of students achieve the competency level, but the remainder, which is 43% of students, are not competent in this task. And that's pretty worrying. Now, it's on basic costing techniques such as absorption, marginal costing, and costing journals. And we'll have a look at and on a question that has to do with absorption, marginal costing, and perhaps look at areas where you struggle with journals. Now, for some of you, this particular exam might be the first exam you take, so you might be a bit rusty or perhaps unsure about the debits and the credits. Now, we'll have a look at what the examiner says about the journals as well in a minute. But yeah, so journals are an area you must be pretty good at in order to pass this exam, I would say, or in order to do well in this first task. Task 5 is to do with preparation of cash or other budgets, and also has elements of spreadsheets thrown in there. So you must be good at Excel as well as budgeting. In terms of this task, the examiner says the notional time allowance for this task is 20 minutes, okay, because it's a 16-mark task. Now, students on average took 27 minutes to complete this task. Okay, so they're taking longer. 55% of students did achieve the competency level, but that means 45% of them didn't quite get there, despite taking longer with this second task, this is task 5. Okay, so it's really important that to understand why and how to prepare for this task so that you don't take as long, but you achieve the competency level. Task 6 is on flexing a budget and calculating variances. Now, if you've studied already the syllabus area, you know exactly how to flex a budget and how to calculate variances. You did this from level 2. However, it's that spreadsheets and reading the question carefully, I think, that makes this task really tricky. The notional time for this task, being a 16-mark task, is also 20 minutes. On average, students took 24 minutes to complete the task. That's what the examiner report says. And 46% of students achieved the required competency level. But this then is the least well-performing task. So task 6 is really the area where you need to be careful. Okay, so if we look at task 1 and some questions from task 1 itself to get up to speed with what it was that the examiner said students did badly on. Well, journal entries, as we said. And what is it in journal entries? Well, it's getting the debits and the credits the wrong way around. So I would say it's important. If you've looked at AAT's practice assessment 1 on their learning portal, for example, they say if inventory was returned, to the store because it was no longer required for production, what would be the double entry here? Now, you've got to be careful with this one. Unless you read returned, if you thought this said issued to production, then the double entry would be, if it's issued to production, the double entry would be debit production, credit inventory. However, if it's returned to the store from the factory, it's exactly the other way around. You would debit inventory going back into your stock and credit production. So it's easy to get these mixed up. So you've got to be particularly careful when it comes to thinking in terms of what the requirement of the question is. So you've got to get your debits and your credits the right way around. And in my opinion, if you do know what you're doing, then it's a case of you're not reading the question carefully. Yeah. Calculating direct materials and fixed production overheads for the job or the cost card. Now, this writing up a cost card is basic management accounting, but you need to know what is a cost card. A cost card tells you the cost for one unit, whatever it is they're making, whether they're making cars, whether they're making cupcakes or anything else, chocolates, my favorite. So it's about calculating the cost of one unit. That's what a cost card tells you. It gives you information about that. Now, we'll have a look at an example in a minute where it'll become a lot clearer as to how to write up that cost card. But sometimes students work out the cost for a batch of 1,000 units, for example, and put that information in the cost card. You've got to realize a cost card is a card that tells you the cost for one unit. Okay. Now, the other area where students seem to struggle was calculating the full absorption cost and the estimated profit. So we'll look at a little example. Yeah. I love this teddy bear. I don't know why he's closing his eyes. He doesn't like management accounting techniques, perhaps. Anyway, ABC Limited makes and sells teddy bears. The management of the company are considering making batches of 1,000 teddy bears for the next year, and they've asked for your help. Following information is available to work out the cost per batch. Now, they've given us the cost per batch of 1,000 teddy bears. So it's really imperative that you read the question carefully. I cannot stress how important it is. So firstly, they told us the direct materials required, that lovely cloth, 1,000 meters for 1,000 teddy bears, and each meter costs £2. The stuffing, 500 kilograms of it at £1 per kilogram, and then the direct labor costs. So they've told us the total hours. Now, bear in mind, all of this information is for 1,000 teddy bears, not for making one. That would be a massive teddy bear they would be making if it was just for one. So direct labor costs for cutting and sewing and then finishing them off. And then we've got our fixed production overheads, our variable production overheads, and our non-production overheads as well. So remember, your fixed production overheads are things such as the rent and rates. These are all fixed. Variable production overheads might be the electricity costs for stitching or using the sewing machine to stitch each individual teddy bear. So that's the electricity costs for each individual teddy bear. The electricity cost for keeping the factory lights on would be a fixed production overhead. Bear that in mind. And then your non-production overheads are things such as your selling and distribution costs, your financing costs, or the salesman's salary, things like that. Okay. So we've been asked to complete the cost card for a teddy bear using absorption costing. Absorption costing is a method of costing that takes the full cost into account. Okay, so not just the variable costs. Now, if we were to categorize these costs into fixed and variable, we would have materials is a variable cost, labor, because for every unit you make, you would incur those costs. Variable production overheads, of course, is a variable cost, but it takes into account also the fixed costs, thereby suggesting that it takes into account the full cost of the making those teddy bears. So they've asked us to use absorption costing to work out the cost of a teddy bear, i.e. they've asked us to write it up on a cost card, and then the profit or loss if 1,000 teddy bears are to be made and sold for £15 each. So that £15 is the selling price of our teddy bears. So we're going to start. They'll give you this in the exam. They'll give you some information. and you'll have to then work out the amounts and things like that. So they want you, now sometimes they'll give you only part of this, as in they'll ask you to work out the prime cost, and then in task 1 part B, this working out the marginal cost will be the second part of the question, working out the absorption cost will be the third part of the question. So all these will add up to give you whatever 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 12 marks for part B of that question. So going back to this example, we're starting with direct material, the cost of the cloth. We know it's 1,000 meters at £2. Now, remember, we are completing the cost card. So we want to divide this by how many teddy bears we are making, 1,000 of them. So effectively, we've got £2 as the cost of cloth for each teddy bear. Then the stuffing, for all those 1,000 teddy bears, they use 500 kilograms and it costs them £1 per kilogram. Again, we divide it by the batch of 1,000 that this is going to make, and that gives us 50p as the cost of the stuffing for each teddy bear. So the total direct material cost, which in itself could be worth a mark in your exam, would be £2.50. Then cutting and sewing. So labor costs. So we are told cutting and sewing those 1,000 teddy bears will take 100 hours at £12 per hour. So we do the same thing. We take 100 hours, times that by £12 per hour. That gives us £1,200, of course. Divide that by 1,000 teddy bears they're making in that time, and that gives us £1.20 as the cost of cutting and sewing. Then finishing. We were told staff take 50 hours to finish them off properly at £15 an hour. These staff are more expensive. So 50 hours at £15 per hour. I think that comes to about £7.50. Divide that by 1,000 teddy bears they're making in that time. So it's costing them 75 pence per teddy bear. Now, this direct labor cost could be worth another 1 or 2 marks in your exam. So if we just add those two up, 195 is our direct labor cost. Then maybe for a mark or 2, we might be asked to work out the prime cost. So the prime cost is, of course, we know the total direct costs added together. So it's your material, labor, and other expenses, but direct costs only. So these are our total direct costs. So we're going to add up our material cost and our labor cost. So the £2.50 and the 195 gives me £4.45 as my direct costs or my prime costs. Then I have to take into account my variable production overheads. So £2, it says per direct labor hour. Now here you've got to be a bit careful. It says £2 for each labor hour. Now we're thinking, what does this have to do with labor? Well, if your staff are stitching the teddy bears and finishing it and taking time to do it, then that is going to push those electricity costs up. So 150 hours of electricity time at £2 per hour, might be not just electricity, it seems pretty expensive if it's costing us £2 an hour. But yes, so 150 hours at £2 per hour is what we need to take there. Now, students tend to forget and tend to get confused and think, why am I taking labor hours? Just go with what it says. Sometimes it works, trust me. Yeah, divided by 1,000, that gives us 30p for variable production overheads. After that, we've got our marginal cost to calculate. Now, sometimes they might ask you, what is the marginal cost of each teddy bear? So that marginal cost we know is all our variable costs. So it's our total variable costs. And I'm assuming you know what variable costs are. Yeah, these are the costs that vary, that increase every time you make an additional teddy bear. So it's your direct materials, it's your direct labor, and your variable production overheads added together. So it's effectively that prime cost and variable production overheads added together. So that comes to 475. Then, of course, we've got to take, because it's full cost, they asked us to use absorption costing, means we don't stop at marginal cost. We go ahead and include the fixed overhead cost per unit as well. We were told that's 4,000 per batch. So we just take the 4,000 and divide it by the number of units, 1,000, that gives us £4 per unit. Now, if we add them two together, we get the absorption cost, the full cost, including the overhead cost per teddy bear. Okay, now, as I said, in your exam, each of these might be tested separately. They might not give you such a lovely table that kind of gives you all the detail. Yeah, but what you're supposed to do is decide on how many marks you want to pick up. You might know how to do your total direct material, direct labor costs and pick up marks there. Maybe you don't know how to do your prime cost. Well, take a guess. Maybe you want to put a figure in there irrespective and work with that figure going forward, because there are method marks for this exam. So if you get your prime cost wrong, but then your marginal cost is right, you will pick up full marks for marginal cost. Of course, maybe, when you added stuff up, you just put the wrong figure in prime cost. But because it's computer mark, the computer will then take your prime cost, whatever it is you've put there, and once you've added the variable production overheads to it, it will give you full marks for your marginal cost, your absorption cost, irrespective of what you put your prime cost figure as. Of course, you won't pick up the marks for your prime cost, but you will pick up method marks for marginal cost, absorption cost being correct there. Okay, so the second part of that question is to do a profit or loss statement. Or they might ask you to calculate the operating profit for the teddy bears and things like that. Now, many a times students don't know how to do this bit, but of course you should have studied it as part of your revision or your learning. So here it's a case of working out, depending on what the question asks you, either the total profit or the profit per teddy bear. Okay, now we've got the cost per teddy bear over there, 875. We worked that out earlier. And it's a case of now working out what is the profit per teddy bear. Or if they asked you to work out the total profit, you need to, first of all, as always, profit is your revenue, i.e. your income, minus your expenses. Yeah, that's the bottom line. When you're working out profit or loss, you take your income and take away from that your expenses. Now, these expenses might be production costs, might be non-production costs as well. You've got to take all of them off. Remember, when we worked out the cost, absorption cost of a teddy bear, we did not take this non-production overheads into account, okay? The absorption cost is the absorption, effectively production costs, okay? So we're going to take into account the production and the non-production costs. So when we're working through this, first of all, sales revenue, we were told £15 is what they're going to sell each teddy bear for. Times that by 1,000, that gives me £15,000 as the income that we're going to make from these sales. Then my direct materials cost, we had that at £2.50. Yeah, that's this, £2.50. So I could take each individual one, or I could just take that 875 as the total absorption cost. I'm going to do it individually so you can see step by step how it's done. Okay, so the direct material cost is £2.50 times by 1,000 teddy bears. Remember here, even if they produce 1,500, we would still take 1,000 because we only take the cost of what we've sold. Yeah, not accounting for opening inventory and closing inventory and all that here. We are assuming what they bought, what they made is what they sold. Then direct labor cost, we had 195 times by 1,000 teddies. Variable overheads, this was that 30 pence. This is, remember, factory electricity to do with sewing each teddy bear. And then we've got our fixed overheads, which was £4. Now, what you'll find is effectively, instead of just doing it each individually, unless they've asked me for that information, I could have just gone, well, you know, take the total cost that I've already worked out in my cost card, that 875, and times it by 1,000. And that would give you the exact same figure that you would get from adding all of those figures up. So I could go 2,500, 1,950, 300, 4,000, and add that up to give me the same figure, 8,750. Now, gross profit, of course, will be my production cost taken off from revenue, which comes to 6,250. Yeah. And then take away all my non-production costs of 2,000. That gives me my operating or net profit of 4,250. Now, if I want to know what is the profit per teddy bear, you probably guessed this already. All I need to do is divide that by 1,000. Now, at level 3, they might not necessarily give you this pro forma for you to work through. But as long as you know income minus expenses is what you need to take into account, then that's it. Okay, so here we go. We're moving on to, yeah, this is one I did earlier. Sorry about that. I just had a phone call. Somebody's desperately trying to get hold of me, but I think sorry.
Lucy, sorry, super quick, just before we move on to the next part, we did have a question that came through. Just wanted to get that over to you.
Yeah,
It was just from Nicole. She just wanted to double check. So she says, so marginal is prime plus variable costs, and absorption is prime plus marginal plus fixed costs?
that's correct. Yes. So if you're talking marginal cost, yeah, or like over
Yep.
here, marginal cost is effectively that prime cost plus variable overheads. So you could look at it in different ways. Yeah. I don't want to make it more confusing, but if you are familiar with prime cost, then prime plus variable overheads is marginal cost, or you could go all variable production costs. Yeah. So if you think about it, material is a variable cost. Labor is also a variable cost because for every unit you make, you would incur the labor cost, the material cost, and variable production overheads. Of course, it is an overhead, but it is a variable cost. So marginal costs, in effect, is all variable costs or production costs. Or you could look at it as prime cost plus variable overheads. Yes, spot on. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that does. And sorry, just to double check, so absorption was prime plus marginal plus fixed.
No. So absorption is marginal plus fixed because
Okay.
marginal is all variable. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, no, that's perfect. That should answer the question. Many thanks.
So effectively, absorption is all variable production costs plus fixed costs. Yeah. Or
Perfect.
prime plus variable overheads plus fixed costs. Make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that should answer the question. Many thanks.
No worries. Okay, so moving on from this, this is the other area that the examiner has said is tricky for students. I've done a journal request here. Show the journal to transfer the cost of the lining to production of the batch. So they've just want us to transfer the cost of the lining. So we go and look at the lining costs. Okay, so the lining costs here, sorry, the stuffing cost, they mean, yeah, 500 kilograms at £1 per kilogram. So if we take those costs, £500 worth, first of all, and we want to transfer the cost to production. They've given us production in the pick list. Yeah, when we are transferring costs, it's becoming a production cost. It's going into production. So where it goes into is what you debit. Yeah. Where it goes out of is what you credit. So it's going out of inventory. So it's going out of stock and it's going into production. That's the easiest way to remember it. Where it's going into, that's the expense for that area is increasing. Therefore, you're debiting the production account and you're crediting the inventory account because it's going out of inventory. Okay. And that's what that is about. Are there any more questions on that task, Jaden? Just thought.
Nothing that's come through so far. I guess we'll just pause very briefly because we don't have a ton of time left. But if you do have any questions at all, if you get them in the chat, we'll be sure to answer them. But I think we'll be safe to move on actually. If anything does come through, I'll pause you at an appropriate time.
Lovely. Okay, so task 5 is the next one. This task tests the preparation of budgets, including standard prices, costs, and budgeting. So you're required to use spreadsheets to organize, to record, to format data, use tools to manipulate, analyze, and verify data. So the examiner said the notional time, as we looked at earlier, was 20 minutes. Students take a lot longer, but don't achieve the required competency level. Strengths were using the if statement, using conditional formatting, using calculating total direct costs, using that lookup formula, really, really good in those areas. However, weaknesses, and this is what you need to look at, perhaps look at videos on AAT's website, learning portal, or also on YouTube. There are many videos that will help you with your spreadsheet skills if you're not sure, but producing a pivot table, yeah, and total by sales, by department, showing total sales by department and by product. So make sure you know how to create a pivot table. Yeah. Use appropriate formulas for minimum and average receipts. This is pretty basic if you know how. But if you don't know, on AAT's learning portal, within that maths area syllabus, you under e-learning, you can see working with data. I think I could show you this. I think I've got it open here. So yeah, if you launch that management accounting techniques and you go to e-learning, within that, there's a lot of e-learning there. But if you look at working with data, it kind of gives you information as to how to go about doing those formulas that are really important, as the examiner has said. So please use that resource which is available on AAT's learning portal. Calculating material and labor costs for each period of production and the variable overheads. This is pretty basic costing. Yeah. So if you're not sure, go back to your level 2 books, have a look at it, and, you know, try and understand what those costs are and how to calculate them. Using a credit period policy to show expected sales receipts. Again, there is a lot of within your green light tests on AAT's website. If you go and have a look on there, yeah, on this learning portal, within green light tests, yeah, you have your green light test that will test you on things such as short-term decision making, inventory control methods. Yeah, using that to help you with things like this will enhance your chances of getting through that exam. Calculating the operating profit margin, you just must know the formulas for these things. If the examiner says these are weak areas, get on there and make sure that you know what you're doing in terms of these particular areas. Now, another thing that I particularly like to look at is the marking scheme. Okay, so this is from AAT's practice assessment 2. If you look at the marking scheme for that task 5, remember the total marks for this task is 16. And out of 16, you've got 9 marks for spreadsheets and 7 marks for the accounting side of things. So effectively, there's very few marks comparatively available for the accounting side. There's more marks available for spreadsheets. Yeah. Now, you might be a whiz at Excel, but one thing I would like to say to you in terms of task 5 and 6 is focus on the requirements of the task. So if the task says do something, you focus on doing just that. So you don't go above and beyond, because you don't pick up any marks for it. In fact, you might lose marks. So here I've got that task 5. If it says use data sort to sort the invoices and that's worth a mark, then that is definitely going to pick up that 1 mark, and you have to sort it just using a basic sort. Okay, so you must be familiar with all these areas: data sort, VLOOKUPs, yeah, creating a pivot table. Of course, you must be familiar with how to create a cash budget, but again, that's relatively straightforward compared to being able to do the spreadsheet side if you're not familiar with spreadsheets. So like I said before, there is a lot of resources available on AAT's website. Do use that. Also use YouTube videos, yeah, to get up to speed with things that would pick up more marks, yeah. And make sure this is the marking scheme. That's literally how the markers will give you your marks. So you've got to ensure that you pick up all those marks because you do exactly what the question asks of you, what the task requires of you. And for that, again, read the question carefully, yeah. Task 6 is pretty similar. Yeah, it is to do with budgeting, but variances included as well. And it's also got spreadsheets. Okay, so you've got to be careful and read the task carefully. Where are the weak areas? Well, freezing rows and columns. Make sure you know how to do that. Using the forecast function to create a line chart. Yeah. How to identify adverse or favorable variances. Well, if you look at task 6 here, so that's task 6 I've kind of put on there from AAT's practice assessment. Now, what they asked students to do, they said to calculate variances. I don't know if you can see that very well, but I'm reading number 5. Calculate variances between flexed budget and actual results, showing adverse variances as negative figures with a minus sign. Now, to be able to do that, yeah, it's not just a case of I'm going to put the formula there and just drag it down, because a variance is a variance. You just take away either the actual from the flexed budget or the flexed from the actual. No, it's not like that. What you've got to do here, they've said, is you've got to first think, is this variance that I'm going to calculate an adverse or a favorable variance? So if it's, in this case, in the first instance, your actual sales revenue, that's a revenue being greater, yeah, is a good thing. So that's favorable. So what you're going to do, you're going to use the formula D7, which is that cell, minus C7. But when it comes to material costs, I can see my actual costs being greater is actually a bad thing. So this time I'm going to have to change that formula so that it's C8 minus D8, so that I get a minus sign in that particular cell. So you've got to be really careful and read the question, as I said, and answer the question as required. Using data validation. Again, if you don't know how to do data validation, it's really, really simple, but not just, data validation as, you've probably used it before, but using a list and using data validation within that list. Be careful, learn all this up before you even attempt any question or practice exams. Calculating percentage of actual revenue, yeah, calculating the net income loss. Again, this is relatively straightforward. Like if here they asked us for the percentage increase between the flexed and the original and the actual results. So what you had to do there was you had to take, remember to calculate that, you take old or new minus old. So that's the new figure. That's the old figure. So when you're calculating a percentage increase, you take new minus old over old, yeah, times 100. Now over here, they wanted you to calculate the percentage by which to flex the original budget. So when they ask you that, yes, new minus old will just tell you the actual results were 20% more than the original budget. But if I want to use that to flex my budget, then I need to add 1 to that formula as well. So if you look at the formula in there, it's D5 minus B5. So that's new minus old over old, which is B5, plus 1. And then to get that as a percentage, we need to use the percentage thing on there. Okay, so that's effectively, reading the question carefully, calculating percentages as required in the question, double checking, making sure that it's right. Again, I just wanted to share with you this, the marking scheme. Total marks for task 6 is 16. Out of that, you have 9 spreadsheet marks and 7 accounting marks. Of course, you need to know how to calculate your variances and all that. And sometimes students lose marks just because they've copied and pasted a formula in the variance column rather than read the question and decided to change the formula in each cell. So don't get caught out in that. Okay, so any questions on task 5 and or 6?
So we do have a question here. I'm not sure if it was from task 5 or 6, but Amy, I think it might have been from the first one because she said she had a bit of internet issues, so she missed the first task. But she was asking what data validation is.
So data validation is where you, let me show you. I don't know if there is a bit of data validation. It's just ensuring that the data that you have is, so for example, let me just show you over here. Suppose we want to put something let's say, cupcakes, wedding cakes. Yeah. And we want, no, let's say products. Suppose we were preparing an invoice, yeah, and we've got some products. So we've got cupcakes, we've got wedding cakes, we've got biscuits, yeah, we've got other snacks, let's say crisps that we sell. Now, what data validation does, so if you go to data and data validation, and let's say we want to pick data from a list, yeah. So what we want is to pick only from this particular list, yeah. So we go over there, the source will be just that list. Now what that does, it only allows you to pick one of those four options. So if I drag that down, I've got to be careful when I do this dragging down of data validation as well. Yeah, so what that does, it allows me, it restricts the data that I can pick up when I'm doing something like doing an invoice. Okay, so that's effectively what data valid. It only allows you to put valid data, and the valid data might just be something that we sell, as it is in this case. It's only these things. Now there's lots of things you can do with that data validation, and when you learn it well, you realize that you can create like error messages, alerts to tell you that don't do this, only pick up the right data, because the right data is only one of these, and things like that. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, I think that answers the question. And if they've got anything additional, we can perhaps answer that later. But do just want to wrap up now. I want to give you a huge shout out, Lucy. That many thanks for coming on. So thank you to Lucy and thank you to Far Training for coming on and doing this amazing session.
Thank you, Jaden. Much appreciated.
No, that's no
And
worries
if
at all.
anybody wants to get in touch with me, my email is lucy@far-training.co.uk.
Perfect. I would urge everyone to note that down. Yeah, an absolute amazing session.
Thank you, Jaden, and appreciate all of you listening in. Hope you've had a good session. Will this be recorded, Jaden? Because somebody asked that online.
Yeah, they did indeed. I was just about to go into that in
Oh,
my wrap up. But yes, I do want to thank everyone for joining and being a part of this Facebook Live. Do remember that these sessions are recorded, as Lucy said, so they're both recorded here on YouTube, and you'll be sorry here on Facebook, and you'll be able to see them on YouTube as well. Our YouTube is at your AAT also. For additional content, news, and memes, don't forget to follow us here on Facebook. But you can also catch us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, and Threads. I want to thank you all for joining, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.